That's Nick.
And that's Joseph. And today we're here to talk about Shirley, the fourth film directed by John Ridley, which Netflix is releasing March 22nd, 2024.
Do I know a John Ridley film?
Well, you should know him as the Oscar-winning screenwriter of 12 Years a Slave. We did review his last film, Needle in a Time Stack, with Cynthia Erivo. He also directed Cold Around the Heart, which I have not seen. I liked his Jimi Hendrix sort of biopic, Jimmy All Is By My Side, which I thought André Benjamin was quite good in. And I also think his documentary, Let It Fall, Los Angeles, 1982 to 1992 is worth a look from 2017.
What is this movie about? Shirley Chisholm makes a trailblazing run for the 1972 Democratic presidential nomination after becoming the first black woman elected to Congress. What's your pull quote?
A spirited Regina King allows Shirley Chisholm to remain a compelling focal point in this subpar approach to an iconic presidential campaign that says more about the era than it does Ms. Chisholm.
Mine. Regina King's performance aside, this subject matter is deserving of a more skilled and comprehensive approach. I think subpar is a good way to describe this movie.
Yeah, it's kind of disappointing. But again, what month is it? March? Just look at how Netflix has unveiled this compared to Rustin.
Sure. The story is very basic. It starts in 1968, and we see that Shirley is running for Congress. She wins, and then we flash forward to 1972, and she decides she's going to run for president. So within the first 10 minutes of the film, she's ready to go.
Yep.
And the next 90 minutes is her...
Over 90, but really...
Well, yeah. Her running this sort of makeshift campaign with a few key players who we'll get to. But there comes a point when it's more than obvious that she will not only not become president, but probably not get the Democratic nomination. However... so much of this movie, I think, doesn't work. And one big thing is that we really don't get a sense of why she's running in the first place. And then when she switches to thinking that it would still be beneficial for her to at least try. But in the end, we sort of realize that she thinks that if she can get enough delegates, she will have some collateral to get something done. But it's not explained what that would be. And then in the end, there's a little bit of like some backstabbing where she doesn't get the delegates. Also, this film will elaborate, but...
The Delegates.
Like, it's just, yeah, it should have been called The Delegates.
The Delegates.
But we don't know, like, where, who, what's, how this works.
This film talks about delegates the way the film Burlesque talks about air rights.
Yeah, in a very... Well, also, like, if a person is not familiar with the democratic process here in the United States, you would be confused. And even if you are familiar, the way they're speaking about delegates is like trading cards. Like, you can just... People can give them and take them, but she ends up getting double, like, I guess like backstabbed or double crossed and does not get the delegates she thought she would. So that's it.
Yeah.
And then of course we get the sort of end title cards where it talks about where everyone who participated is or ended up. The
film has a very odd crash landing, because
yes.
It's like Shirley's the end of the presidential campaign happens, and then this supporting character who is suspiciously popping up all over named Barbara Lee, all of a sudden it switches to the actual Barbara Lee talking about her memories of Shirley Chisholm.
Right. Well, let's just start with just break down the characters. So Regina King is Shirley Chisholm. The movie's called Shirley, and I feel like I don't know much about her as a person.
I don't know why it's called... So, add to this confusion, there was a 2020 film called Shirley about the writer Shirley Jackson, which this film has the same composer as.
Oh, interesting.
It's just really odd. But there's Shirley Chisholm had a common saying, unbought and unbossed, and she wrote I forget what year, 1980. A memoir with that same title, but we never hear that.
No. And even that attitude, I mean, at one point she does say that that I don't have any rich donors or no corporate backings to influence me. But it's so odd that someone who was known for that attitude, it's not showcased in this film. But all we know is that she lives in Brooklyn and she's a school teacher. and decided to run for Congress. And she is very concerned about issues affecting the inner city. That's about it. She's married. We don't get a sense of... The only real sense we get of her marriage is that she's kind of the dominant
Yes, she's a
player.
Yeah.
And she is somewhat estranged from her family. There are 4 siblings, and it seems like her siblings and her mother all felt like Shirley was her father's favorite. And that's why she walks around thinking that she's better than everyone.
And he left her his money, I guess.
But even that sentiment, because we get a scene with Regina King's actual sister playing her sister,
Raina, and both of them produced this as well.
explaining this feeling that the family has. But as the audience, I didn't get the sense that Shirley thought she was better than anyone. I think Shirley just wanted to get things done.
She was doing what she had to do to change the political landscape, yeah.
So, yeah, like there isn't a lot about her as a person. Okay, then there's this campaign. So there are a few players. Mm-hmm. Lance Reddick. I believe this is now at long last finally the final film we'll Release,
see him in.
yeah.
But I was highly entertained by him.
I would say of all the supporting characters, he's the most effective.
I mean, his speech pattern, and he's frustrated throughout almost all of this with Shirley.
Yeah. Then Terrence Howard is in the film with nothing to do.
Well, he's the one that's charged with financing the
But then all he does in the movie is stop people from entering her office while she's eating lunch.
Yep.
And then we find out in the end title cards that character, that man, ended up being her future husband.
Right.
So she divorces the man we saw as her husband.
Conrad.
Who seemed unsatisfied with their marriage.
Yes.
And then, so isn't that odd?
It's odd that we don't get any kind of
You would not have...
inkling of...
We were both surprised, like, wow, because from this film, you would not think these two had any connection. Except that he was protective of her lunch.
Yes.
Like her mastication. I don't know.
Yes.
Then there's the campaign manager. Who...
Stanley, played by Brian Stokes Mitchell, who's hired.
I thought he was effective in being very frustrated with, as Chad Michaels would say, this chicken shit gig. And then there's this white kid she hires.
Lucas Hedges.
Who used to be an intern in Congress.
Yeah.
Like who I think worked with her indirectly. Who made an impression on her. And she hires him to be her like student outreach coordinator. And this was a topic that I also felt like should have been highlighted, especially thinking, fast forwarding 40 years or close to 40 years when we realized that former President Barack Obama won his campaign really off the backs of social media and the youth. But Shirley Chisholm in this movie, her character saying that this will be the first national election where 18-year-olds can vote. So we really need to activate them.
But we don't ever see that in motion.
No, and that's such a key thing. But so this is what I think. I think that the filmmaker, screenwriter,
John Ridley
probably didn't want to highlight how unsuccessful her campaign was. So instead, they kind of focused on her drive. But I don't think that we needed to drag how poorly the campaign was handled. I think that this just required more. What I found the most interesting with Shirley's presidential campaign was the inner workings of the Congressional Black Caucus.
Right.
And how there was a lot of infighting and all of the logistics of that and the function of the delegates was not explained at all.
And how much better would this have been if we had focused on those inner workings and made it kind of like House of Cards?
Yes.
Like these dealing, because she's somebody that is preaching that you have to be part of the political process in order to change it. But she's also refusing to play the game in a lot of ways. And it's interesting where that balance happens of you have to kind of break rules to get somewhere, but then eventually you have to play some parts of the game. It's just learning what to play and what not to.
If they chose to make a feature film, I really think this should have been a mini series. And I think if they couldn't be as slick as House of Cards, it could have even taken a political animals approach.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
But this woman and what she did in that environment just requires a lot more space. Because as it is, it's like they're telling but not showing everything that's happening around her. There's an attempt on her life, an assassination attempt. that racist ass George Wallace, that when he gets shot, she goes to visit him, and
That compromises her a bit. Yeah.
and we get just a touch of it. Then she aligns with the Black Panther movement in California at a
we get
point.
a really corny scene. We need to talk about that scene.
Well, let's talk about it.
Okay, with Huey Newton at the safe ground of Diane Carroll's house.
So we're told that the president, or the president of the Black Panthers, will only meet with Shirley on neutral ground.
This is brokered by Barbara Lee.
By Barbara Lee, who we need to get to Barbara Lee too. But this deal that's brokered with the help of Barbara Lee is made possible by sort of a mediator, Diane Carroll, the actress. And so she provides her home as neutral ground. I thought that scene was handled so...
That scene's terrible. And then Barbara is on the phone calling Shirley Chisholm to set it up. And you probably wrote down the whole line because Shirley is kind of exclaims like, "Oh, Diane Carroll, what's she got to do with it?" And she says...
Well, she says she looks like an angel, but she fights like the devil for civil rights. I thought all of the dialogue for Barbara Lee was so corny.
It's bad.
Well, so then let's segue to Barbara Lee. So Barbara Lee is like this she's 25, single mother, struggling to make ends meet, but finds herself at some rally where Shirley Chisholm is and ends up talking to her. And Barbara is explaining how frustrated she is with the political process, but she feels motivated hearing Shirley and seeing what she's done. And she asks Shirley, "What should I do?" And Shirley goes, "Well, step one, are you registered to vote?" And Barbara says no. And Shirley's like, "Girl, well...
That bourgeois claptrap."
You better get your ass registered." But then, of course, Barbara's making excuses about how her voice doesn't matter. And Shirley offers her an unpaid job. And then we see Barbara Lee in the background every now and then,
parroting the things that Shirley has said to her.
And then it's not until the very end, with the end cards, that we see that she ended up becoming a member of Congress. And I believe Barbara Lee is currently the longest serving Black woman in Congress. So it just feels like that could have been an interesting angle. Make this movie about Shirley and Barbara, and how they intersect, and passing the baton.
I think they were enhancing the relationship between these two women more than really what was probably happening. But that scene at Diane Carroll's house is not good.
I only have a few notes. When Shirley, so the opening scene was not a good start. The cinematography, this feels very low budget.
Ramsey Nichol was the cinematographer, same who's worked with Ridley before.
And the opening scene I thought was like a dream sequence, because it looked like Drag Race season 1, and then it was pure green screen. It's Shirley entering or walking up the steps of Congress to take a group photo of all the first term Congress members. So that was a rough start. Then we see her in the halls of Congress, and she bumps into another senator, this old white man, and he is just stuck on the fact that they both make the same salary, $42,500. And I do have to say, Regina King as Shirley, she really is doing a fine job, because in that moment when she gets him together, I thought was so good. She just really needed a better production.
She deserves a much better production. Script. And I mean, it is nice to see her with her actual sister, whose names both mean Queen King, which I find fascinating.
Yes.
But Reina King doesn't really have anything to do.
No. Well, and then because their one main meeting is Shirley has invited her sister to meet her for coffee, because a magazine's doing,
I think it's the Times, isn't it?
a piece on her. And of course they want to speak to family. And of course Shirley wants her family to have positive things to say. And her sister's like, "No, we're not going to do that. This is embarrassing. Everyone thinks you're crazy for doing this." There's just no context.
There's no context. And I think what we're really missing, as good as Regina King's performance is, I wanted to see behind the ambiguity of how much she really believes she can pull this off, or what she can do. And is there a point where when you start doing something that's impossible, will you start believing like I could really do this.
That's how I felt, and it would be such an interesting angle because we're all very familiar with like how we are currently, where we see all of these people running to be on the ticket and that process, and how people just fall off, and then all of a sudden they're supporting the person they were bad mouthing a month ago.
Yeah,
that could have been such a great angle. I think another great angle could have been that at a point, Shirley's made aware that the television, the main network doing the debates is not inviting her to debate. And she says, well, we need to sue the network because like it's their legal obligation to allow me this opportunity, and I'm polling better than some of the people they invited. So then she gets her little white boy, well, she doesn't, her advisors get this white boy who is studying law to figure it out, and he does. They sue the network, and the network agrees. I thought that one situation could have been a movie.
I know, but it's just how frustrating that she does a fine job of. King's performance is like rising above like all of these obstacles. Like how demeaning to the way that she was spoken about and treated and handled in almost every possible way, which I think is evidence of Shirley Chisholm should have her own movie. And I mean, George Wallace had his own little mini series back in the 90s, and he's a terrible person.
Yeah.
So why hasn't this happened before? Also, why isn't this better? Is just the feeling I'm ultimately left with watching.
Well,
this.
I felt really sour that like her time, like her first term in Congress, we get it's literally like 6 minutes, and a big part of that is her checking someone talking about their like equal pay, and then her getting upset that her first committee appointment is to the agriculture committee, and she's like, well, I represent the inner city, like ain't no agriculture. So she confronts
the House Speaker
of the House, and then that's a moment, and then we see that she actually does get the appointment she wanted. But it's like, these are big moments for this woman. And it's just, we gloss over so much.
Well, and also I think the film it needed to address the fact that Shirley Chisholm is not the first black woman to run for president, technically.
Technically, she's the first to run for a major party, but there was a woman before her.
Who's Charlene Mitchell in '68, who ran on the communist ticket.
Yeah.
But of course, the communist
I mean, I feel
ticket,
that's a small...
It's a small thing, but I think how people talk about Shirley Chisholm is one of the few black women that I remember whose name I heard in a civics course in high school, right? So I feel like there's all these misconceptions about her being the first black woman to run for president. And it's like, well, and I feel like this film doesn't do a good job of finessing any kind of complexities.
Her accomplishments deserve better than this, and I think we could have alleviated the frustration I have if we would have just focused on some of the key moments. I really think her suing the network to debate, and then the film... If they took that approach, imagine how badass it would have been to end that film with the one-on-one interview she gave, because she was a great speaker.
Yeah.
But yeah, this feels like in 11th grade when you have to write a book report and you don't read the book, you skim the cliff notes, and then the night before you stay up till 2 a.m. and write something. That's how this feels.
Yes.
Also, I didn't like the score.
The score at times is egregious. It is not only like kind of muted, but is doing all these very schmaltzy. It's trying to imbue what's happening with some emotion. It just feels corny. I don't know.
Sorry to these people. What would you give Shirley?
She fights like the devil for human rights. Or so that's just that line. Oh, that poor actress. What's her name that played Barbara Lee? Christina Jackson. That you do what you could, but that was that was a hard bargain you had to do to star in this film. I would give Shirley 2 out of 5.
Yeah, this is a miss. I would give it 2 out of 5.
But I would love to see Maxine Waters biopic starring Jennifer Lewis. Can somebody make that happen?
You're manifesting it now.
Yes, happen. That needs to happen.
Join us on Patreon and listen to our podcast. Bye.